Hi friends, for those that are new here, I'm Pätrick. I am exploring plant-based wellness and how that intersects with my personal growth, the little family that I have here, and the communities that I navigate in and around me. And I will say that there's been a little boost in the sub count since posting my last video, and I just want to say a special thank you and welcome to those individuals. I hope to learn and grow and share and exchange with you guys in the videos and the postings ahead, and to see what's going on in your life. So again, hi. Now, as some of you know, I've been documenting my experience with microdosing and macrodosing, specifically in relation to the synthesis retreat, which is based in the Netherlands, and they are looking to set up and potentially extend to here in Oregon in the United States. And I thought I would share my actual phone call with them and what I took away from it, what it was like, and what maybe made me a little uncomfortable. Now, as some of you know from my other videos, I've been trying to connect with them for several weeks now since I first filled out my intake inquiry in January. They again, as I mentioned, they seem to be pretty busy because they schedule far out. And to be completely candid, I actually had 2 scheduling appointments with them, both of which were a no call, no show on their end. I found that a little challenging only because I think if I had not followed up, nobody would have followed up with me that they missed our appointment. And because they're booking so far ahead, I decided that I was going to schedule a couple different appointments, thinking if they were going to not show up to another one, maybe they would potentially be available for a later, sooner appointment. And what I ended up doing was I booked 2 appointments back to back on their calendar and then a third one later in the day. And to my surprise, a pleasant surprise, the first of these 3 appointments was responded to and held, and I was welcomed by an individual who was able to warmly introduce and hold the space for our conversation. I wasn't quite sure what her background or credentials were. In the beginning, I sort of was under the impression that this was a specific intake towards the actual experience and logistics aspect to the retreat, but as the conversation sort of found its way through unfolding, I found out that it was more of an intake for a supplemental health screening, which is definitely beneficial. She and I talked about past therapies I've explored, what led me to the aspect of psilocybin or magic truffles or psychedelics in general, which I was gladly able to share with her, the support of my therapist, as well as my metabolic physician, my PCP, if you will. And we talked about some general things, about some health history, the longevity of my application to addressing mental health, as well as just some odds and ends that were fairly straightforward and plain that you would have in a conversation with somebody. Very general intake-oriented questions. But one question kept on being repeated. In fact, I think it was asked almost 6 times in the duration of the appointment itself, and I just didn't have an answer for it. It was something to the effect of, how do you think you would react, or what do you think your experience with magic truffles or psilocybin would be in this type of guided wellness retreat? And I had a hard time answering it because from my point of view, I don't know how to anticipate an experience from something I don't have a baseline with. And I struggled with identifying that. I don't really know. I don't have that answer. I don't know. I would have no honest answer to that. I have no idea. I've never used a psychedelic drug, so I have no way to really measure a response. I don't have an answer to that. I have no idea. And even when I thought I was being super clear on I didn't have an answer to it, I felt that I was definitely not communicating effectively on not having a definitive answer for something I don't have a direct experience with in the past, so I don't know how to anticipate it in the future, which on a personal level, it felt like I was able to delineate past, present, and future and to separate them. And also that is being productive, that is growth in itself, that you're able to identify. I can't look that far ahead and try to, put a square peg into what I'm expecting is a round hole if I have no idea what the actual shape of the hole is. So it was one of those things where I was taking away that it's okay to not have a direct answer in this moment because you're constantly taking in information, and new information leads to changes in perception, as well as just new information leads to new decision making. So that was one particular reoccurring question that I had that I struggled with. Another question that blew me out of the water was I was directly asked what specifically my trauma was and if I would like to share any of it. And again, to my surprise, in the wheelhouse of here's some personal growth that I didn't realize that I have come to, is that I identified a boundary and said that I was just not privy to, I'm not quite sure exactly what I said. It was something to the effect of I would not be inclined to share that information. I am not inclined to share that. And I think that with anyone with the PTSD or CPSD background would know, you don't necessarily have to constantly talk about your trauma to prove that you've healed from your trauma or that you have adjusted from it. If I were to project what I think the question was for, I think it was a sense of understanding if I had a way to grasp hold of emotional regulation in relation to my trauma. And I think that's more what the question was supposed to service, but the direct ask about the details of what it was that sparked trauma within me was a little bit jarring to say the least. But I think what I surprised myself on a positive note was to identify a boundary and just saying that, the specifics of this does not define where the situation is, and I know the difference between the two, and this is not readily public information that judges whether I am or am not worthy of a specific wellness application. But I think, and I just want to reiterate that I believe that the intention of this question is more to determine where you're at with personal growth and where you are at with your therapeutic approach to, those emotional regulations of knowing what your triggers are, knowing what certain situations that make you tense and anxious and uneasy, knowing what those different factors are that make you, shut down or flight, freeze, and what's the other one? Fight, fawn. And yeah, so while that question was, I don't think I've ever had anyone directly ask that question to me before. I've only ever seen it in pamphlets about what to do with people who are not trauma informed. So it was, to hear it in real life, it was a little bit of a shock to my system, but also what was a pleasant surprise to myself was knowing here's a boundary and here's where my comfort zone is, but I'm willing to talk about certain things around it. Unfortunately, I think that this is where the conversation took a little bit of a shift. I think in what you learn from emotional intelligence training that there were the cues in this conversation that this individual seemed to rapidly disengage from the conversation itself, as well as just the line of questioning, and it didn't feel like there was a natural denouement of questions that followed this particular one. So by not directly answering the what is your trauma question, I felt like I was being tossed these softball unplanned questions, and it led to a quick wrap up about thoughts about CBT and DBT, as well as past therapies and what is or is not applicable or shows long-term effects in relation to CSPTSD and PTSD as we know it. I talked a little bit about knowing where people particularly are in the current line of wellness pursuit and what the tools that do work in any given moment are not necessarily the tools that work in the moment forward or moments of the past. And as everyone grows, needs shift and change. And I felt like I had at least rebounded my self-confidence in the aspect of a flowing conversation of, okay, we just got over the hump of not talking about this one thing, which is perfectly fine. Again, nobody has to explain their specific identified trauma experience. It at least ended on a full circle about the beginning of the conversation was essentially what led you here to the end part of the conversation of, based on your past, what is your opinion moving forward and what you're looking for? And it sort of recertified the aspect of, I've done this research, I've talked to the care and health providers around me who support my endeavors and where I'm going with it. And it felt a little bit more full circle, and that was a good feeling towards the end. There was a little bit of a question opportunity at the end of the intake conversation to answer my questions, which were largely based around what are the expectations and formats of a guided retreat in the current health crisis and how that might affect timelines and moving forward. And that answer was largely directed to, we're not quite sure, which is a honest and direct answer, which I appreciated. And it also was directed to, some of my questions were directed to, well, that's a conversation you would have with your intake screener. So there's definitely two aspects of this. And then my screener conversation is supposed to come next week or the week thereafter, which I am oddly very eager about, only because I thought that this was going to be that conversation and it wasn't, and that's okay. But again, this is all a journey and a step-by-step venture forward. So the little steps are important, the planning steps are important. It's good to know that you have everything sort of like checked off and in place, and you're not running in to do a fool's errand by not having the right research or comfortability or support systems around you. And so these little planning things are a little bit, I don't know, when you're eager to go, you want to sort of jump through them and just skip these steps, but they are important. But since I am having one of those intake questionnaire oriented conversations in the near future, I'd love to get questions from you, because you guys are going to have more questions than I can think of or allow me to think of. That's wonderful. Why didn't I think to ask that the first time? Let me know down below what you would like to know, and I will include that on my next video on the next step in this planning process to synthesis and a psychedelic guided wellness retreat. And if you're following along on this particular quest of mine, make sure you hit like down below. And if this wasn't your jam, that's okay too. Just remember to do something kind for yourself today. Remember to grow from where you are, and I will share more with you soon. Tschüss! Hey, so I am going to include clips on some of my responses to those questions that I mentioned that I wasn't quite expecting, but also there might be some questions that I think were just general questions that maybe might surprise you guys. So if you are interested in hearing the full intake conversation, I'm gonna find a way to stream it online, and I'll put the clip down below in the description so you can hear the full 40-minute intake conversation and how it was. All right, so bye.